Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is feeling bold and defiant. The European Union today debated the state of EU-Turkey relations with growing calls for Turkish membership talks to be suspended. 5 decades after they started, for his part, President Erdogan says Turkish patience is waning.
The people we are trying to communicate with are not acting sincerely. If the European Union is not acting sincerely, we will have to find a way out. Why should we wait any longer? We are talking about 54 years. You will stall Turkey at your door for 54 years, and then you will ask why?
At home, he's basking in his narrow constitutional referendum victory that gave him sweeping new powers. On Tuesday, Turkey carried out airstrikes against Syrian Kurd forces that are U.S. allies in Syria and Iraq, and the president has vowed there'll be more to come. This, as Turkish police arrested more than 1,000 people across the country in its ongoing purge after last summer's failed coup. Our Ian Lee has more now from Istanbul.
The beginning or last gasp of a political movement. Protesters take to the street daily, rejecting this month's referendum, which increases the powers of Turkey's presidency. But defying authorities comes at a cost. We met Abdulrahman Atali last week. He vowed to fight the results. We later found out the police detained him. He's since been released, but his lawyer says he was arrested for inciting protest.
Provoking people against the results of the referendum is not a crime in Turkish law. This is about freedom of speech.
Turkish authorities continue a crackdown on opposition, rounding up tens of thousands of people since last July's coup attempt.
Government used that coup d'etat a reason to eliminate all the opposition.
The government insists it's to protect Turkey's democracy, but rights groups call it silencing political dissent. Protesters feel the referendum, which President Recep Tayyip Erdogan won by a razor-thin margin, was stolen. European monitors say it was neither free nor fair. There's a cloud of controversy surrounding this referendum, with allegations including 2.5 million suspicious votes. Nearly 1,000 ballot boxes only had yes votes, and more than 2,000 ballot boxes had more votes than registered voters. Independent election monitors say these could be indicators of election fraud.
All of these issues create doubts within people's minds. We made a survey with our volunteers. They were very doubtful about how the process worked out in accordance with the legal framework.
Erdogan dismisses the accusation, saying the election is the will of the people. So much at stake in a referendum that's poised to reshape Turkey. Ian Lee, CNN, Istanbul.
Listening to all of that is RAVZA KAVAKCI. She's a member of parliament with President Erdogan's AK party, and she joins us now from Istanbul. Welcome to the program. You heard that. You heard what people are saying, that, first of all, they believe there's been plenty of irregularities, and secondly, that the government is using last year's coup to just crack down on all sorts of opposition. How are you going to rectify that?
Well, as to the protests, there are many countries where people may not like the outcome of elections, just like it happened in Brexit and when President Trump was elected in the United States. But arguing that there was fraud in the elections is nonsense. It's not based on any truth. We have an independent electoral board who had made the decision that there has not been anything fraudulent in the elections. But as to the protests that do not accept the result of the referendum, that's understandable. People are free to demonstrate and protest as they wish, as like they do in any democratic country. As long as they do not violate the law, they will not be taken into custody.
Well, you know, then why are they being taken into custody? You heard one of those people talking to our Ian Lee. I mean, just they were protesting and they were taken into custody. Yes, they were released, but they were taken into custody. And you do know that there are hundreds and hundreds of political dissidents and journalists and all sorts of people in custody.
Well, as far as the protests are concerned, I don't know why that particular gentleman was taken into custody. We see lots of similar things in the United States, in France, after protests, police, if people violate the law while they're protesting, they take them into custody. On to the issue related with the situation after the coup attempt, Chiristian, we underwent a coup attempt that that was aimed against Turkish democracy and aimed against killing millions and millions of Turkish citizens. 80 million people's lives were put on the line after that coup attempt. I understand that people may have their concerns as far as the numbers are concerned, but the people who are taken into custody, they go through the court system. There's a lot of thousands of people who have been released after they have given their statement. So this is just the judicial process in Turkey.
Well,
we are grateful to the 249 souls that have lost their lives for this nation, and we will do, the justice system will do whatever it takes to make sure everybody answers in the court of law.
All right. You know, most of your allies around the world fully supported the government and was pleased the government was able to face down that coup and have democracy survive. But, as you can imagine, the world does look on in horror at a perceived slide away from democracy. I mean, just today, 1,000 more people were rounded up. And you know that it's having an effect on your relations with your allies, your relations with the West. At what point do you stop rounding people up and say, okay, we've done enough now?
What would you suggest? What is a good number? What is a good number when people have aimed at lives of the regular citizens? Look, imagine F-16s flying over the Pentagon. Imagine your country's men dressed in your country's uniform, in the United States Air Force uniform, going and bombing the Senate. That's what we lived through in Turkey. Yes, I understand the concern. However, we do have the rule of law, and I don't think anybody in the world should have the courage to say that Turkish people have not stood for their democracy, because they have.
Well, that's what people are saying. That's what I've said. Ms. Kavakcci Khan, that's what I've absolutely said. People stood up for their democracy, and now tens, if not hundreds of thousands, are being rounded up over the last year. But I want to ask you, because you're making your point, obviously, about why shouldn't we do this, but what does it mean for your relations with the rest of the world? And are you giving up, for instance, on the EU? Look, the EU MEP, Marit Keskache, said, under the leadership of President Erdogan, Turkey is rapidly drifting away from Europe. The referendum result is a tremendous blow for the people in Turkey. Now is the time for the European Union to make it very clear that business as usual is no longer possible. So do you think they're giving up on you? And are you, as President Erdogan hinted, giving up on the EU?
No, we are not giving up on the EU. We value our partnership. It's been an ongoing process. But I think it is very, very disrespectful to say that if the Turkish people voted yes, then they deserve what comes. This kind of understanding is not acceptable. Look, President Trump won in the United States. Brexit was won by 51.9% of the votes. You may have certain protests and people who may not like the outcome of the votes, but I think it's totally disrespectful to argue that what outcome came out and what the Turkish people decided on should be disregarded. I don't find that as a point of perspective that respects democracy.
All right. On that note, Ms. RAVZA KAVAKCI Khan, thank you very much indeed for joining us with the government perspective.